The defense acquisition system is made up of three major elements. The acquisition process has received the most reform attention with the Adaptive Acquisition Framework and dozens of pages of reform in each National Defense Authorization Act. The requirements process is also getting serious attention from the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. However, the funding process has remained virtually untouched. That is, until recently. In May 2020, the United States Space Force released an alternative acquisition system report stating that consolidating budget line items to manage United States Space Force programs at portfolio levels is the most important recommendation in this report. But what does that really mean? Let's open up a Space Force budget submission for research, development, test, and evaluation. You'll see the budget line items called program elements and the amount of funding requested. An example program element is the Advanced EHF MIL-SATCOM, or Military Satellite Communications. Each program element identifies its funding for fiscal year 21, which is planned from at least 2 years before and includes estimates out for the next 5 years. Once Congress appropriates funds, the funds cannot be moved between programs at will. Cumulative movements of funds into or out of a program that the Pentagon can do under its own authority is capped at 10 million or 20%, whichever is less. This is called below threshold reprogramming, or BTR. Any greater movement requires prior approval from Congress, and before that, the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB. This process makes it difficult to reprogram more than the BTR threshold. Over the last 20 years, the DoD averaged less than 30 above threshold reprogrammings per year. Prior approval is also required for transfers of any size, which are reprogrammings that cross appropriations, such as from operations and maintenance to RDT&E. The ceiling on transfers put on the Pentagon in fiscal year 2020 is $4 billion in general transfer authority for the base budget and $2 billion in specific authority for overseas contingency operations. Rather than raising these caps or changing the process, the Space Force asks to consolidate similar programs into budget line items that represent portfolios. These portfolios have capability areas like space support to operations that includes communications and navigation satellites. This provides the Department of Defense more flexibility to take advantage of opportunities at the speed of relevance. This is what it looks like in the budget. An appropriation is made up of program elements. This is the level that Congress controls reprogramming through prior approval. Program elements are made up of one or more projects, also called major thrusts. The lowest level is the budget program account codes. The DoD has flexibility to move funds within a program element, but not between them. The Space Force is proposing that current program elements become projects underneath fewer numbers of consolidated program elements, such as space support to operations. The DoD may make more financial trade-offs without invoking the prior approval process. Command and control is another example of a consolidated capability area. It might include efforts currently controlled as program elements like JSPOC mission system and enterprise ground services, among various others. These trade-offs are important. In 2018, researchers Tom Kuntz and David McNichol found that acquisition programs are routinely overfunded in the early years and underfunded in the later years. Portfolio management is critical to balance the needs of a diverse set of complex technology programs. Quite frankly, agile development is not possible without a funding mechanism that can respond to change, which is vitally important in the information age. By contrast, the current budget process is a waterfall approach based on industrial era norms of prediction and control. The Senate Armed Services Committee seemed to agree. The fiscal year 2021 National Defense Authorization Act report said of budget flexibility, it, quote, encourages the DoD to expand its use of mission-based budgeting. The House Appropriations Committee had a different view when it wrote, quote, the committee finds that one of the effects of this consolidation would be the increased ability of the Department of Defense to realign funding among different activities without seeking prior congressional approval. The granting of additional budget flexibility to the department is based on the presumption that a state of trust and comity exists between the legislative and executive branches regarding the proper use of appropriated funds. This presumption is presently false. So what happened? The House Appropriations Committee is suspicious of budget flexibility because President Trump directed the Pentagon to transfer funds to the U.S.-Mexico border wall program without prior approval. The Pentagon transferred $2.5 billion in fiscal year 2019 without prior approval from Congress, and on February 13, 2020, transferred another $3.8 billion. The Pentagon stayed under the transfer authority limits put in the Appropriations Act. However, can the President bypass congressional prior approval? While the DoD Financial Management Regulation requires congressional prior approval, the executive branch does not find it legally binding. The precedent comes from a famous General Accountability Office ruling in 1975. The context is the prototype YF-16 flyoff against the YF-17 in the Advanced Combat Fighter competition. While the Air Force clearly favored the YF-16, the Navy had many reasons to prefer the YF-17 design for carrier operations and awarded a contract to navalize the YF-17. The House Appropriations Committee, however, wrote in their report that the Navy's funds could only go to the winner of the Air Force program in order to create a joint surface aircraft. "Holy moly, we're in trouble," exclaimed NAVAIR's general counsel, and indeed they were. The GAO later decided, however, that a conference report is not legally binding and that the Navy did not violate, quote, moral or ethical standards, end quote. Without this action, the F-18 Hornet we know today would never have existed. You see, in the Defense Appropriations Act, funding is controlled by appropriation, not program element, except for Navy shipbuilding and other interest areas. Statute does not require prior approval of the executive branch to reprogram funds, though it does cap the transfers between appropriations at $4 billion in general transfer authority with the approval of OMB. Yet the Space Force never intended to challenge the prior approval process. It simply wanted to consolidate program elements based on meaningful capability or mission areas within an appropriation to enable portfolio management. So the question is, how can we balance congressional control with DoD financial flexibility? Stay tuned for more. Learn more about budget reform at acquisitiontalk.com and contact me to keep the discussion going forward. For example, the satellite program Advanced Extremely High Frequency MILSATCOM, or Military Satellite Command.